Hi and welcome to the Behind the Bricks podcast. Today we're diving deep into the world of deal sourcing, and let's be honest, deal sourcing doesn't always get the best press. But we're not here to sweep that under the rug, we're here to tackle that head on and flip the script. In this episode we'll uncover the 7 deadly sins of sourcing, and more importantly, how to dodge them like a pro. We'll help you move from being part of the problem to leading the charge in a new wave of smart, ethical sourcers with better deals, better service and better returns. At Source, we've helped loads of people turn sourcing into serious income, some even pulling in up to £50,000 a month in recurring revenue. So you're in good hands. Let's jump into it and get you on the path to becoming a sourcing superstar. So I'm going to be presenting this episode on my own today. However, I do have producer Melissa, who's sitting in the other hot seat of the podcast, which you'll have seen before, and she's going to be asking me some questions later on in the episode. But going through the 7 deadly sins of deal sourcing, I'm going to be doing that on my own. So number 1 is getting distracted by sexy properties. So what do I mean by this? You might have heard of this called the shiny penny syndrome, and that you get distracted by the shiny penny syndrome and it leads you off in a direction that you hadn't intended to go. Getting distracted by sexy properties, or more realistically, sexy strategies, is something that people fall victim to all the time. And basically, when you sit down at the start of your sourcing journey and you create a plan, and you plan out which kind of properties you're going to find, how that fits in with your longer term goals, and where you're going to find those investors from that are going to buy those properties. When you work all of that out and you start on that process, and what might happen is you realize that actually it's quite difficult. It's a much more difficult process than you had anticipated. Then you see another strategy or another way of doing things, and you think, well, actually that looks easier to do it the other way. And so that's the shiny penny over there that's distracting you. And then you go off in that direction. And then when you try and do that strategy that had been distracting you, you find out actually that's just as difficult as what you'd been originally trying. But now, because you've given up on the original strategy, you've now wasted all of that time. Instead of building on that momentum and increasing the amount of properties that are coming across your desk, or increasing the amount of investors that you're talking to, you've now had to start at the bottom rung of the ladder again. And if you continue to get distracted by something else, continue to fall victim to the shiny penny, then you might make a bit of progress, but then you go down, you start another strategy and you go down to the bottom rung of the ladder again. And then you do that again, you make a bit of progress, and then you're down again because you've been distracted by something else. The only way to overcome that is to make sure that you're absolutely sold on the plan that you create at the beginning of your journey. Make sure that you're 100% behind the direction that you're going, and then give yourself a set period of time and work as hard as you possibly can up to that period of time. But give it enough time to make sure that you know whether it's going to work or not. 6 months, a year even. The second deadly sin is skipping the deep dive. Now, we are going to look at due diligence in a couple of different ways, because obviously you've got to do the due diligence on the property, and that's what a lot of people talk about, just doing their DD on the property. But also, before you do the DD on the property, before you even look for the properties, you need to make sure you've researched the area well, and you need to become an expert in that area. Now, this is more important for some specific property strategies than others, but it is still relevant to every single property strategy. What is happening in that area at the moment? What is the average return that the strategy that you're going to source is producing in that area? That's a given that you need to know that. But also, what's happening in that area? What's the employment like? Is the employment going to increase or decrease? And you'd be looking into that if that was important, because you're suggesting that the property that you're going to find is going to be held and rented out. Because if the investor is going to hold that property and rent it out, they want to make sure that not only is the occupancy level going to be good now, but it's going to be good into the future. Because the longer that they can hold that, the more capital growth that they're likely to have. So don't only look at the property and how relevant the property is and the numbers for that property, but look into the area. What's going to change in that area? A really good place to look for this kind of information is local newspapers. So if you're not local to that area, if you're sourcing from a distance, then make sure that you're subscribed to all the local newspapers online, and make sure that you get that information, because local newspapers love stuff like big planning applications, or bypasses being built, or housing estates being built, employers moving into the area, or employers moving out of the area. That's their absolute bread and butter of the kind of articles that they write. So make sure that you're an expert on the area in which you're sourcing. Now, that's going to be easier for you to do if you've got a specific area. If you're looking at sourcing across the entire UK, that's going to be more difficult for you to do, and more difficult for you to put together an information pack or an advert that you send to an investor to show how thoroughly you've looked into that area and why they should invest in that area, because that investor is investing not only in that property but in that area as well. So that's number 2.
Deadly sin number 3 is inaccurate due diligence. Now, there's 2 different aspects to inaccurate due diligence that you need to be wary of. Obviously, compiling your due diligence and doing so using the best possible data and making good decisions about your due diligence is absolutely perfect. However, what can sometimes happen is people can put their due diligence together and the deal doesn't work. But the deal might not work only just. And they'll look back at the due diligence and they'll start to tweak some of the numbers in order to make the due diligence work, in order to make the margins just that little bit wider, in order to justify that deal being presented to investors. Now, if you're doing that and it's realistic that you can change the numbers in that way, great, no problem, absolutely fine. However, if it's not a realistic change that you can make and you are just simply slicing costs off because you don't want to include the costs because it makes the numbers look better, then that's not a sensible decision to make. If you look at the GDV and you just raise the GDV by 5 or 6 or 7 or 10 grand in order to make the margin look bigger, but that GDV, that higher GDV isn't achievable, that's not a sensible thing to do. Because what will happen is you'll make those changes, you'll present the deal to an investor, the investor will have a look at the overall deal and the overall finances, the investor will do their own due diligence, and the investor will find that actually your numbers are not accurate. So now not only is that investor not going to buy this deal from you, but they're not going to buy any deal from you, because now they don't trust the numbers and the pack that you put together for that property. So it's far better to make sure that your numbers are accurate and achievable, and you evidence that by showing how you've achieved those numbers, and you present that to the investor. Now, you might say to me that, if you put your deal on social media, for example, that all the deals on social media have got a 20% return. And the deal that you've found here, and the deals that you would like to present to investors because you know that investors are going to buy them, has only got a 15% return. Now, I would say to that, don't worry about it, right? The investors are going to look at those deals on social media, they're going to look at that 20% return, and they're going to do their due diligence. And look, if that source has found a deal with 20% return, more power to them. Congratulations, that deal's going to sell and you're going to make a bit of money from it. But a lot of the deals that get presented out there, and one of the reasons that sourcing doesn't have the best reputation in the world, is that the deal sourcer hasn't put those figures together correctly. And that that investor is going to go through that process of doing their due diligence, and they're going to feed back to that deal sourcer that actually those numbers don't work. So now, instead of going for a 20% deal, the next time that investor's looking for a project to buy, they're going to seriously consider yours. And yes, it is lower than 20%, but they're going to seriously consider yours. And when they start to look into the numbers, they're going to see that everything's accurate, and you're building that credibility with that investor. And so initially, that investor might get distracted, might get their head turned by the deal with the bigger margin. But over a period of time, you're going to organically attract people into your community that you can add to your list that are interested in not only buying that first deal from you, but buying as many deals as they possibly can from you, because your numbers add up, your numbers make sense, they agree with your numbers, and therefore why wouldn't they continue to buy not only the first 4 or 5 or 6, but the first 10 deals from you? And so instead of having a huge number, a huge list of investors that are looking at your deals, your list might be smaller, but your list is much more active and they're actually buying deals from you. And your business is much more efficient than these other people that are not doing their due diligence correctly, and a lot of their deals are falling out. So doing your due diligence correctly, even if it means that your numbers are slightly lower than other people's, is actually a better way of sustainably growing your business than just by putting deals with huge margins on. Deadly sin number 4, underestimating the refurbishment cost. Now, this is a bit of a bugbear, right? Because we talk about doing due diligence and we talk about comparables and we talk about, getting data from lots of different sources to justify why your deal makes sense before you're presenting it to an investor. However, with refurbishment costs, this can be quite difficult to do because you're going to need a third party, you're going to need a builder to come in, especially when you're first starting off and you look around a property and you have no idea how much it's going to cost to convert this property. Obviously, over a period of time, you're going to get used to looking at properties, understanding how much work needs to be done, and putting together those costs so that your ballpark figure is going to be accurate. But when you're starting off, you might have absolutely no idea how to do that. So you're going to need to get some builders to come in and have a look at the property and then quote for you. Now, I was just at a franchisee's house yesterday, actually, and we had a conversation about the website called My Builder. And that website and other websites like it are an absolutely fantastic way of getting the attention of builders who are in the market for the kind of deal that you're advertising out there and have got good availability. Now, that's a good way of initially meeting that builder, but then what you should look to do as the property sourcer is befriend that builder. Don't try and hide from them what you're trying to do, because as soon as you start lying to people or misleading people, then if they find out what you're actually doing, then again, they're never going to use you again. They're never going to trust you again. So be honest with them about what you're doing and what you're trying to achieve. Because ideally, what you want from that builder is that they're going to come in, they'll have a quick look around. They probably won't put together, an extensive quote for you, but they'll give you a good idea as to how much that build cost is going to be. And then from that point, the rule of reciprocity means that you would then recommend that builder to the person that buys that property from you. So you've already got the builder lined up. Now, if you're smart and you want to increase the amount of money that you're making from your deal sourcing, you could also arrange to have a commission paid to you by the builder as like a referral fee or an introduction fee to that person that's going to buy the property, and then employ the builder to do all of that work on the property. But getting that refurbishment cost in a ballpark area is very, very important, because that investor as well is going to judge you on the accuracy of that refurbishment cost. And if they buy that property and you put down the refurbishment cost of being about £30,000, and yet at the end of that property project it's cost you £50,000, that investor is probably going to point the finger at you and say, well, you told me it'd be 30 grand, whereas actually it was 50 grand. So the next deal that I buy, I'm not going to buy from you because your refurbishment costs are out. So again, in terms of growing your business in a sustainable and consistent way, it's really important that you get those refurbishment costs right, just as it is with getting your due diligence right. Deadly sin number 5 is not to have a pipeline. So let's imagine a situation where you found your first deal that you're going to sell on, and then you put all your marketing pack together. You talk to a bunch of investors, you sell it to somebody, and then they say, well, actually, not only do we want to employ the builder that you've suggested to us, but we want you to project manage it as well. And so this is the only deal that you have going on. So you're obviously quite excited and you want to make sure that everything goes well. So you're probably going to get more involved with this deal than you would with any other deal that you ever oversee. But what does that mean? That means that you might be taking your attention away from some of the other stuff that you should be doing. And some of the other stuff that you should be doing will include finding the next deal and the next deal and the next deal. Because your overall funnel for finding deals, for attracting investors into your community, finding deals, matching those two up, that takes time. And if you don't specify a certain amount of time in your diary every single week to bring new investors in, to bring new properties in, and to put your time together in having conversations to match those two things up, then your business isn't going to grow. Your property sourcing income isn't going to grow. So you need to make sure when you're looking at your overall diary for your pipeline that you allocate adequate time for finding investors, finding properties, and then working on putting those two things together. Because without it, and without having that allocation of time every single week into that, you'll get to the end of that project where you've got more involved than you probably would with any other project, and then it's going to take you a long time to build that pipeline back up again. And therefore you might have a couple of months where you're not making any income. Whereas if you make sure that you're specific with your time, and you always allocate time to doing those tasks, your income will be much more sustainable. Deadly sin number 6, not enough investors and no relationship building. When you're talking about deal sourcing, everybody thinks that the majority of their time is going to be spent just finding deals because that's the rarity. And over a longer period of time, I kind of agree with that. However, when you first start, that's not the case. You're going to put just as much time into finding investors as you are into finding deals. But then the investors that you initially start to work with are also going to need nurturing. And this is what everybody forgets. Nobody remembers that you're asking that investor to spend 100, 200, 300,000 pounds on a property that you found that you've done your due diligence on. And so for them to feel comfortable in doing that, you're going to have to build your credibility with them. You're going to have to nurture them so that they know that what you're presenting to them makes sense and is realistic. How do you do that? Well, you stay in touch with them for a period of time. So if you think that somebody has, if you've gone through the process with somebody and they've passed your due diligence tests of AML and KYC, know your customer, AML, anti-money laundering, and they've shown you that they've got proof of funds, then you then need to make sure that you stay in touch with that person, because that person, if they've done all their due diligence with you, then they're ready to go, right? And so that's a rarity. And you need to make sure you nurture them because you want to keep them close to you so that when you find the right deal for them, they buy that deal straight away. So you need to, as an absolute minimum, stay in touch with them every couple of weeks or so. Now, depending on how busy you are and depending on how good you think that investor could be, the way that you stay in touch with them could be sending them an email. And what would you put in that email? Well, you might show them the deals that you found over the last couple of weeks. You might show them some of the properties that you've looked at and you've decided not to progress with, because again, that's all credibility. That's showing your decision-making process and showing them the properties, your activity in the properties that you're discounting because they wouldn't be right for that person. But also in that email, you need to be showing them the areas that you're looking at, and you need to be sharing the way that you go about your due diligence, because they need to get to know and learn your process, so that when you present a deal that is going to work for them, they know what you've been through, they know how you've come to the conclusion that you have, and why you know that that's the right deal for them. Now, how long that's going to take is going to change from one person to another, because some people will be more trusting than others. Some people might have had their fingers burned previously, and so it's going to take them longer to come around to purchasing a deal from you. But the point is, you need to work that into your plan, into your business plan, so that you're not expecting to, with the first property you find, sell that straight away. It's probably not going to be the case. With the first couple of properties that you find, you should use those properties to market them, to get the attention of investors, to nurture those investors, and then maybe after a month of nurturing those investors, some of them might be ready to buy from you. Now, it might happen faster than that for you, and if it does, fantastic, well done. I'm very pleased for you. But in terms of being realistic about your scheduling and when you're going to make money, I'd say from the initial point of finding an investor to actually selling to that investor, I wouldn't expect that process to last any shorter amount of time than a month. Now, if you think the investor's really good, instead of emailing that investor, you might call them. And certainly once you've sold a deal to an investor and you know that they've got more money to buy another one, you should be calling that person to update them on your activity and on the deals that you're looking at right now and anything that you have to sell. Because that's the kind of relationship that you'll want with that person. It's going to be much more of a discussing property with them, and you might meet up with them regularly and you might give them actually quite a lot of your time. But you would only do that once you know that they're a serious investor and they're ready to spend money with you. And finally, deadly sin number 7 is not to have a marketing strategy. What are you going to do? What do you need to do? You need to find a deal, you need to find a property, and you need to put it in front of investors in order for those investors to have a conversation with you about that property, right? That's essentially it. So what can you do, and how can you reach people who are going to want to purchase that property from you? The first thing that you should do, that again I think a lot of people forget, is talk to your friends and family. Talk to the people that you might have on social media that already know you, because it's incredible how, those 300 friends that you've got on Facebook, how many of them will actually be into property. And you might put a property deal on there and show it to your friends and family to show, to say, look, if anybody's interested in purchasing or investing in property, then I've got this at the moment and these are the returns. Some of them will just get back to you and say, oh, actually, no, I'm not interested in that, but I've been investing in property for a while. What is it you're doing? Or they'll just start to have conversations with you about property. Now, from there, that cascades into them connecting you with people that might be interested in purchasing that deal. So long as you manage that relationship and you manage that conversation correctly, and instead of just saying, oh, well, you're not interested in it, I'm not going to get back to you, I'm not going to talk to you about it. Talk to as many people as you can, because if you can get friends and family referrals, then that's going to be a lot easier than nurturing an investor from absolute scratch, because referrals work really, really well. So that's the first thing that you should do. Use your existing network. And this strategy, this marketing strategy, should all be written out in your initial business plan, right? When you're working out how you're going to go through all of this and how you're going to find deals and how you're going to sell deals, you need to make sure that you've got a marketing strategy and how you're going to get in front of people. So the first thing and the easiest thing, the lowest hanging fruit, has got to be that you're using your existing network. You're telling your existing network that you're in property, and you're showing them the kind of deals that you're going to be selling. That's an absolute must. Now, taking that a step further, are you going to build your social media profile by becoming a property person? Are you going to mix in property groups on social media? Are you going to discuss things with property people in third-party property groups on social media? Because there's some huge groups out there that have got 40, 50,000 people in them. Now, if you're discussing things and you're building your credibility on there, then more of those people that are in that group are going to want to follow you as an individual. And so those 300 friends that you had on Facebook at the end of last week can become 500, 1,000, or you could reach your personal profile friend limit of 5,000 within 12 months. All by going into these groups and building up your profile within property. Now, again, that's a strategy. And for the most part, that's a free strategy. So all that takes is your time. So why wouldn't you do that? It's a very sensible idea to do that. But then beyond that, if you're particularly familiar and good at running things like digital marketing campaigns like Facebook ads or Google ads, then that might be part of your strategy. If you know a good marketing agency that can handle those ads for you, that might be part of your strategy. What we do for our franchisees here at Sourced HQ is we've created an app, and we've created a platform on our website where we allow our franchisees to post their deals on there, and that is then shown to investors, and investors can inquire with them through our deal search or through our app, and that inquiry goes directly to our franchisee. So we're making this part of the process as easy as we can for our franchisees. But as an absolute must, you have to be talking to as many people as you possibly can about property and that you're selling property. Even when you go to the dentist, does the dentist, dentists are paid fantastically well. They might be investing in property. Are they looking for another property? Every single conversation that you have, you need to be turning around to be talking about property in some kind of way. And that's a very powerful way to organically, assertively, but organically grow the amount of people that are looking at you for providing deals for them.
So for this next section, what we're going to do is, as a deal sourcer, you're going to look at a lot of deals, right? And you need to be able to make a decision quickly and efficiently as to whether you look into that deal in more detail, or whether you skip that deal and you go on to the next one. So we're going to play a game now called Source or Skip. And because I'm on my own, I've got producer Melissa sitting in the other hot seat. Say hello, Melissa.
Hello.
And Melissa is going to read through 5 different scenarios that I haven't seen, and I'm going to just as if I'm looking through Rightmove, and I'm going to tell you whether I'm going to look into it in more detail, which will be source, or whether I'm going to skip it because it doesn't sound like the kind of opportunity that I can sell, in which case I'll say skip. So, over to you.
Okay, so number 1, 2-bed flat in a rough area, 15% yield but a high tenant turnover.
I'd skip that one.
Why?
Okay, so the 15% yield is pretty good. I don't know how that yield's been calculated, because that might be when there's a tenant in there, but if you've got a high tenant turnover, then you're probably going to experience quite a few voids, and it sounds like it's going to be a difficult property to keep the occupancy high, and so I would skip that one because I don't feel I'd be giving my investors a good steer with that one.
Okay. Number 2, off-market HMO in a university town.
I would, although for me, do I have to justify this one as well?
If you were.
Okay. For me, off-market, on-market doesn't actually matter. I think that's a fallacy. In fact, I saw an interesting stat that came out at the end of 2023 that said that properties that sold off-market, on average, sold, I think it was about 8% higher than properties that sold on-market. So that whole fallacy of if you're buying it off market, you've got a better deal, that's absolutely not true, in my opinion. Off market HMO in university town. HMO in university town, then I would source that one. Yeah, there's always a demand for HMOs in university towns, so that's a source for me.
Okay. Ex-council house, needed a full refurb, no comparables nearby.
Skip.
Right?
No comparables. If you can't justify any of those numbers that you're working to, you're basically guessing. And all right, it's an ex-council house, which probably means that the purchase price is a little bit lower than the non-ex-council houses in that area. However, it's still an awful lot of money that you're guessing with. And so again, I don't think I'd be giving my investors a good steer if I suggested to them that they buy it, even though I can't find any comparables. And when it comes to the looking at comparables, we're saying no comparables. So absolutely no comparables, not perfect comparables. We're saying no comparables, because the majority of properties that anybody sources is not going to have a perfect comparable. You're going to have to make do with comparables that aren't quite right in some way, but you are still going to be able to put together a very good picture as to what the finances of that property can or can't achieve. But if we're looking at no comparables, then it's a no.
Okay. A ready-made deal from another sourcer.
No, I would not touch that. Now, if I knew the sourcer and it's somebody that I'd worked with for a while and they'd built up credibility with me, maybe I would. But we're going to look at this as if I'm just starting out. And if I'm just starting out and I'm looking for properties and I'm finding it difficult, looking at another sourcer that's got a property and thinking, well, if I co-source with that person, that's an easier way for me to get access to a property to then introduce to investors. However, you have to bear in mind that sourcing doesn't have a good reputation, because not all sources out there are going to be as diligent as you are. Especially if you're part of Sourced and you've gone through the due diligence training. A lot of sources out there that are not part of Sourced are not going to have that compliance or due diligence training, and so I wouldn't
use another sourcer. I would much prefer to find the deal myself, even though it's going to take longer. Find the deal myself, control the deal myself, control the investor myself, because that's a better way for me to build up a long-term and sustainable business.
Okay.
So the answer to that was skip. Yeah.
Okay. And last one. Seller who wants asking price plus the contract to do the refurbishment.
Okay, so it's a seller who is a builder who knows, we've had a conversation, they know what I want to do. They'll only sell it to me if I give them the contract to do the refurbishment.
Yeah.
Right, okay. No, skip.
Why?
You know what? I can't... In theory, that seems like it's solving problems. But in practice, whenever something like that happens, whenever somebody insists on being involved or doing the refurbishment or something like that, those deals always seem to go wrong, because ultimately that person that's made the deal with you will let you down in some way. So I can't... That's a really hard one to justify logically, other than my experience of doing those kind of deals. So I'm sort of standing outside of being a sourcer that's just starting their business. Those kind of deals always seem to go wrong, so I wouldn't fall for that again. So I hope you found that useful, looking through those deals as if we were looking on Rightmove and as if we were just having that initial first glance of the deal, and whether we look into that in more detail. So the next game, in which there are 4 options, 4 different categories, is Sourcer Says. So this is Melissa's going to ask me again about a way of doing something, and I'm going to either confirm or say that there's a different way of doing something in terms of the process of deal sourcing. So over to you.
Okay, so find a deal, then figure out the numbers.
Find a deal, then figure out the numbers. Well, yes, you have to do it that way. You know what? Look at the overall process. First of all, you look in an area and you put your due diligence together in that area to see whether that area is going to produce the kind of properties that you're looking for, with the kind of returns that you're looking for. Then you find a deal, however your deal sourcing is going to operate. Then you find a deal, and then you decide whether you're going to deep dive into that deal to then do the due diligence to put those numbers together. But at every stage, you've got to justify putting more of your time into that property. So your time is by far the most precious thing that you own. So if the property is not worth looking at, you're obviously going to skip it. But the most important thing that you need to do is make sure that you're doing your numbers first before you start to get excited about the property. The numbers have to justify whether you put more time into that property. And that might seem really, really sensible to you, but it's incredible the amount of times that people have come to me and they've got a property and they're obviously really excited about this property, and they say, oh, look at this one, and they'll start talking about the property and talking about the planning for the property and talking about how they've talked to the owner of the property, and the owner of the property is a really nice guy and he just wants to move out and he doesn't need all the money on completion, and what you could do with this property, and you could move this and you could do an extension, and they go into a huge amount. They've obviously done a lot of work on this property, and then you say to them, what are the numbers? Oh, I haven't looked into that yet. And then you say, well, let's take the next 5 minutes, because that's what it's going to take. You've spent 3 hours on this property so far, 4 hours, 5 hours, whatever it is, but let's actually look at the numbers now. And in the next 5 minutes, when you're doing the numbers with them, the property doesn't make any sense whatsoever. So all of that time's been wasted. So area analysis first, then find a property, and then at every stage after that, the numbers have to justify spending more and more time on it. And if the numbers aren't there and the numbers don't justify that, you have to let that property go.
Okay. You need 100 investors before you can start sourcing.
No, that's absolutely not true.
How many would you say?
1.
1?
You need 1 investor, right? You need 1 investor that you're building credibility with, because 1 investor could buy 100 deals. Mm-hmm. So you need to have 1 investor, at least 1 investor, who is credible, who has done everything you've asked them to do, and is ready to go. And if you've got that 1 investor, you can start sourcing deals, because you've got somebody to present those deals to.
What would you say to someone who had 100?
I bet they're not they're not 100 active investors, right? They can't be. That person isn't. I would say the maximum number of investors that you can have that are ready to go, that you're calling every week, that you're talking to regularly, is what, 5, 6, to fit in with all the other stuff that you have to do. So if somebody comes and says that they've got 100 investors, they've got a list. They haven't got investors, they've got a list, and they might be emailing that list, but that list isn't being nurtured as well as it should if they're treating all of those 100 the same.
Okay.
So quality, not quantity, is much more important.
Okay. Posting a deal in a Facebook group is totally fine.
So long as it is compliant with the rules of that Facebook group, then yeah. I mean, there's Facebook groups that are set up for deal sourcing. Now, what's going to happen? We've done this for a long time, so we know that if you post deals on Facebook groups, you're probably going to get quite a lot of inquiries, but the majority of those inquiries are not going to be of particularly good quality, right? But if you're just starting out and you've maximised talking to your friends and family, and you've maximised going into groups yourself and building your credibility and getting people to like your Facebook, Instagram profiles, then posting the deals into groups is the next logical step. Now, some deals are set up, some groups are set up to post deals into, so absolutely post them in there. That's where investors are going to be looking. But don't post them in groups where you're not supposed to be doing that, because you'll just get kicked out of the group.
Is it enough?
Is it enough to do? That's a terrific question. So one of the things that I've always asked myself throughout any business that I've run or been part of is the question, what more can I do? Especially when I first started up in property, because it's such a competitive market. I always ask myself, what more can I do? And instead of looking at, if I've got a HMO and I put the rooms on spare room, which is what everybody does, instead of thinking, yeah, I've done enough there, I'm happy with that, I've always asked myself, well, I've done that, but what more can I do? And that then led me into building relationships with local businesses and becoming part of the onboarding process of local businesses in order to fill my HMO rooms. And it was always asking myself that question that got me to that sort of that next level, that level where most other people aren't doing it, and therefore I had a niche in the market that gave me a competitive advantage. So I would never say that anything that I'm doing is enough. You're always looking for more that you can do, always.
Okay. Spreadsheets are your best friend.
It's a close run thing. It's a close run thing between spreadsheets and investors. If you've got good investors, then they're very, very, very good to have in your pocket as well. But other than that, it's got to be spreadsheets. Having spreadsheets, because you share them as well, don't you? It's not just for you. It's not just what you put together. It's what you share with other people. And when you share with other people, and not just your investors, you will obviously show them to your investors, and you'll build your credibility with those investors. But you'll also share them with estate agents or letting agents, and you'll use them to negotiate prices down, because you can show how the whole deal looks to someone and say, well, I'd love to offer you the asking price of 140, but I'm buying it as an investment, and overall this is what the deal looks like, and therefore the maximum I can offer you is whatever the spreadsheet says. I say to our franchisees here, when they ask me my opinion on something, it hardly ever comes down to my opinion or their opinion. It's always what the spreadsheet says. The spreadsheet makes the decision as to whether you move forward or not. And actually, we were with some franchisees yesterday. Purchase price, this was a property on Rightmove. The initial price for that property on Rightmove was £170,000. They got it for £130,000 because that's what the spreadsheet said. And the owner of that property at the time took a bit of negotiating, but was happy to accept that price because they could see that that's what they were going to do with the property. There was no BS involved. They were being absolutely factually accurate. And if that person wanted to sell that property to them right there and then, it was 130 grand. And that was the end of the negotiation. So they're definitely up there in the top 3.
Okay.
So this episode's been all about deal sourcing. It's all about not only deal sourcing, but practical, pragmatic application of information so that you can build your business, source more properties, and ultimately put more money in your pocket. So I really hope that you've got some value from the episode. Big thanks to producer Melissa for jumping in and asking some questions. But I hope that you found the 7 deadly sins of property sourcing useful, and I hope you can apply it, and I hope that helps you take your property sourcing and your compliance to the next level and makes you much more competitive in your local market. So this has been the Behind the Bricks podcast. My name's Chris, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time.